On a February afternoon in Orlando, in front of a stadium full of families, a 6-ton killer whale pulled its most experienced trainer into the water and refused to let her go. She had worked with these animals for 16 years. Minutes later, she was dead. It wasn't the first time this whale had killed, and it wasn't the last orca to turn on the people who fed it. Here's the part nobody can explain away. In all of recorded history, no wild orca has ever killed a human being. Not one. So what happens to them inside the tank? Start with what a killer whale actually is, because you need to feel how far the top of the ocean sits above everything else. Orcas live in every ocean on Earth, from the ice edges of both poles to the warm water of the tropics. They hunt in coordinated groups, and depending on the family and what it has learned, the menu can be almost anything. Herring, salmon, seals, sea lions, dolphins, sharks, even the calves of the largest animals that have ever lived. Nothing hunts a healthy adult orca. It is the one predator with no predator above it, and it has held that spot for as long as we have watched. We even gave it a name that promises violence: killer whale. It sounds like a warning, and everything about the animal seems to back it up. The size, the teeth, the black and white body cutting through the water like something designed to end things. So when one of them drags a trainer under and drowns her, the story tells itself. A killer finally killed. The animal was always dangerous, and the tank just handed it a victim. That explanation is clean, it's satisfying, and it is almost certainly wrong, because the wild record says the exact opposite. Orcas share the water with people constantly. Fishermen work beside them, divers swim near them, surfers paddle over them, researchers spend whole careers a few meters from their pods. And across all of that contact, over every decade we have been keeping track, there is not a single documented case of a wild orca killing a human. The closest thing on record is a 1972 incident off Point Sur, California, where a surfer was bumped and bitten once and survived. That's it. That's the entire wild attack history of the ocean's apex predator. The name was never about us. It came from sailors who watched them tear apart other whales and called them whale killers. We're the ones who flipped it around. Now put that beside what happens in captivity. Since the 1970s, captive orcas have attacked close to 24 people and killed 4. One whale accounts for 3 of those deaths. His name was Tilikum, and his history is the clearest window we have into what goes wrong. In 1991, at a small marine park in Canada, a 20-year-old trainer named Kelty Burns slipped into his pool, and Tilikum and 2 other whales grabbed her and passed her between them until she drowned. In 1999, a man who sneaked into SeaWorld Orlando after hours was found dead on Tilikum's back the next morning, covered in bruises and bite marks. And in 2010, Tilikum killed Don Brancho, one of the most experienced trainers in the entire company. The 4th death happened on Christmas Eve of 2009 at a park in Spain, where a whale named Keto killed a young trainer named Alexis Martinez, leaving him with compression fractures and torn organs. So the split is impossible to ignore. Harmless in the ocean for all of recorded time. Lethal inside a box. That split is the whole mystery, and the easy answer collapses the moment you look at it. If orcas were simply predators waiting for a chance to eat a person, the wild would be a slaughter. There is more open water, more human contact, and far more opportunity out there than in any tank. Wild orcas could take swimmers almost at will, and they never do. Predatory instinct doesn't switch on only behind glass. Whatever is turning these animals into a danger isn't the species, it's the conditions. And to understand the conditions, you have to understand the mind you're putting inside them. This is where the orca stops being a monster and starts being something far more unsettling. The killer whale has one of the largest brains on the planet. And it isn't just big, it's built in a way ours isn't. When neuroscientist Lori Marino examined orca brains, she found an entire region, called the paralimbic area, that is dramatically more developed than the same region in the human brain. It sits right beside the parts that handle emotion, and it appears to be doing something we don't have the hardware for. Marino's blunt conclusion is that it would be hard to argue the human brain is capable of more emotional depth than an orca's. This is not an animal running on pure instinct. It's a mind wired for feeling, and for each other. And the each other part is everything. Wild orcas live in matrilineal families, groups organized around mothers and grandmothers. And those bonds are among the most stable in the entire animal kingdom. Calves often stay with their mothers for life. Each pod has its own dialect, its own calls, its own learned hunting traditions passed down like culture. In one part of the world, orcas charge in a line to wash seals off ice floes with a coordinated wave. In another, they deliberately beach themselves on shore to snatch sea lion pups and wriggle back into the surf. In another, they herd herring into a tight ball and stun them with slaps of the tail. These aren't instincts, they're techniques. taught by one generation to the next, different from family to family, the way human cultures differ. Some researchers think an orca's very sense of self may be tied to its group, that being an individual and being part of the family are not separate things for them the way they are for us. When you grasp that, a single orca alone in a tank stops looking like a captive animal and starts looking like a piece of something that has been torn away from the rest of itself. That tearing is not a metaphor. Most of the early captive orcas, Tilikum included, were taken from the wild as young animals. He was captured off Iceland at around 2 years old, herded and netted away from his mother and his pod and shipped to a concrete pool he would never leave. The capture itself was violent, and the separation was permanent. Marino puts the consequence plainly. Take a calf from its mother and its natal group at that age, and you have already done damage. The only open question is how that damage will eventually show itself. Now look at what the tank offers a mind like that. In the wild, orcas swim around 100 kilometers a day. They dive deep, they navigate by sound across huge distances, they live in a world that is constantly moving and talking. A captive pool, by legal minimum, can be as little as 48 feet across and 12 feet deep. One famous captive orca named Lolita lived in a tank that was less than 2 of her own body lengths wide at any point. Another, named Kiska, was recorded swimming roughly 879 laps of her tank in a single day, covering about 100 kilometers, the same distance her wild cousins travel through open ocean, except she was going in circles and ending exactly where she started. And then there is the sound. Orcas navigate and understand their world through echolocation, firing clicks into the water and reading the echoes that come back. In the open ocean, those echoes carry information across huge distances. Inside a bare concrete tank, the clicks hit hard, flat walls and bounce straight back, over and over. An animal built to see with sound, trapped in an acoustic hall of mirrors. For a mind that lives by listening, that is its own kind of torment. You don't have to guess what that does, because it's written directly on their bodies. Look at the dorsal fin. In wild orca populations, a collapsed, flopped-over fin is rare, under 1% in most places. Among captive adult males, it happens in something like 80 to 100% of them. That tall fin bending over sideways is not normal, and it is not cosmetic. It's a visible sign of an animal spending its life at the surface of a shallow tank instead of driving through deep water. Then look inside their mouths. A 2017 study of 29 captive orcas found that nearly half had moderate wear on their teeth. A quarter had major to extreme damage, and more than 60% had undergone a procedure where trainers drill down into the tooth. They get this way by chewing on the steel gates and concrete edges of their pools, grinding themselves down out of stress and boredom. And once the teeth crack, they have to be drilled and flushed for the rest of the animal's life to keep infection out. The behavior tells the same story as the body. Captive orcas develop what scientists call stereotypies, repetitive, meaningless actions that signal a mind under pressure. Kiska, near the end of her life, was seen rubbing herself against the tank wall until she was injured, thrashing and floating motionless in one spot for long stretches. These are the marine equivalent of a caged animal pacing the same 3 steps forever. None of it exists in the wild. All of it is manufactured by the box. And then there's who they're forced to live with. In the ocean, an orca's podmates are its blood relatives, speaking its dialect, sharing its traditions. In a marine park, whales get shuffled between facilities and housed with unrelated animals from completely different populations that don't share their calls or their culture, crammed into a space with no way to escape each other. 2 researchers who studied this, John Jett and Jeffrey Ventra, both former trainers themselves, described the result as chronic conflict, whales raking their teeth across one another's skin and ramming each other with nowhere to flee. On top of that sits a training system built on controlling food. A whale that performs correctly gets fed, a whale that doesn't. That means an animal that already can't leave, can't hunt, and can't find its family also has its next meal tied to getting a trick right in front of a crowd. Add constant sun exposure they can't dive away from, ulcers, and a shelf of daily medications, and you have assembled, piece by piece, every ingredient of a psychological breakdown in a creature whose brain may feel more deeply than ours does. So now go back to the attacks, and read them again with all of that in mind. They stop looking like a predator hunting and start looking like something breaking. Take Kasatka, a female at SeaWorld San Diego. In 2006, during a show, she grabbed her trainer Ken Peters by the feet, dragged him to the bottom of the pool, and held him there under her full weight, thousands of pounds, pinning a man underwater in front of hundreds of people. He survived, barely, with a broken foot and puncture wounds, because he stayed calm long enough to get free. Here's the detail that reframes it. Kasatka had reportedly just heard the distress calls of her own calf, Kalia, who had been moved to a separate pool. Over the years, all 4 of her calves had been taken from her, and with each separation, her aggression toward trainers grew. That is not a hunter selecting prey. That looks far more like a mother in distress, striking out in the only direction a tank leaves open to her. The death of Alexis Martinez fits the same shape. Keto, the whale that killed him, was born in captivity and had been shuffled between parks before ending up on loan in Spain, a young male living far from any natural family group. During a training session, in the water with a trainer he knew, he turned. The injuries told the story of raw, overwhelming force. Compression fractures, torn organs, a body battered rather than a body eaten. Keto wasn't hunting a meal. He was a captive-bred animal, doing what the pressure of that life produces on the person standing closest to it. The same logic sits under the day Don Brancho died. Hours before the fatal session, aggression among the whales had already forced the park to cut a show short, and Tilikum himself was being treated with antibiotics for an inflammation. This was not a calm, healthy animal choosing to hunt. It was a stressed, medicated, chronically confined whale at the end of a bad day, and the trainer was simply the nearest large presence in the water when whatever was building finally came out. And notice what these attacks are not. Dawn, Alexis, Kelty were drowned and battered, not eaten. The whales weren't feeding. They were doing something else entirely, and the science keeps pointing at the same word: frustration. That's the mechanism. Not appetite, but pressure with nowhere to go. Picture what you actually have. A brain built for constant social connection and 100 kilometers of movement a day, wired for emotion in ways we may not even fully share, then locked in a silent concrete box, separated from its family, housed with animals it can't understand, and denied nearly everything it evolved to do. An animal like that has no outlet. The stress builds with no release, and when it finally breaks loose, it comes out on whatever is closest, which in a show pool is almost always a trainer. Researchers call it redirected aggression, and it's the same force that shows up on the teeth, the skin, and the fins. An attack on a human is that pressure pointed outward instead of inward. And this is where the honesty has to come in, because the science that dismantles the born killer story won't let us build a tidy new one in its place either. We cannot climb inside a whale's head at the moment it grabs a trainer and prove what it intended. Some incidents might mix stress with play, or curiosity, or simply overwhelming power applied by an animal that doesn't grasp how fragile a human body is. SeaWorld has disputed many of these claims for years, and at one point published its own study arguing captive orcas live just as long as wild ones, a claim independent scientists called misleading. What we can say with confidence is narrower but heavier. The conditions that produce chronic stress in these animals are real, measurable, and documented on their own bodies, and the wild record still stands untouched. Given open ocean and their own families, they do not do this to us. The cost of the arrangement lands on both sides of the glass. On one side, trainers dead and maimed. On the other, the whales themselves. Captive orcas die at roughly 3 times the rate of wild ones. In the ocean, females can live 60 to 80 years, and one is confirmed to have reached over 100. Tilikum, the whale who killed 3 people, died in his mid-30s, after decades in a tank, having spent almost his entire life in exactly the conditions this whole story is about. He was taken from the sea as a calf and never saw open water again. When you know what his brain was built for and what his years actually held, the 3 deaths he caused read less like the crimes of a monster and more like the wreckage of something that was slowly destroyed and took people down with it. So put the full answer together. It isn't that orcas are killers by nature, because the wild has told us for as long as we've listened that they leave us alone. It isn't simple predation, because these whales aren't eating anyone. What the evidence actually supports is chronic psychological stress in one of the most intelligent, social, and wide-ranging animals on the planet, expressed as frustration and redirected aggression under conditions that strip away everything its mind was built to need. The old assumption got exactly one thing right. These animals are absolutely capable of killing a person in seconds. What it got wrong was the cause. The capability was never the reason. The captivity was. There is a strange, quiet epilogue to all of this. After the death of Don Brancho and the documentary that followed, public feeling turned hard against the shows, and in 2016, SeaWorld ended its orca breeding program. That means the roughly 55 killer whales still living in tanks around the world today may be the last generation to be born or kept this way. But an ending on paper does nothing for the animals already inside. The whales alive right now will live out their years in the same pools, with the same bent fins and drilled teeth and unanswered calls, carrying the same pressure that has already killed. The mechanism doesn't retire when the policy changes. Which brings it back to that fin. The tall dorsal fin, bent over sideways above the surface of a show pool. The image so common that millions of people have seen it without ever asking why. It isn't a quirk. It isn't harmless. It's the visible edge of a collapse happening everywhere we can't see. In the teeth ground down to the pulp, in the laps swum in endless circles, in the calls that go unanswered because there's no family left to answer them. And pushed far enough, that same collapse is what ends with a trainer held under the water. The ocean's killer whale spent all of recorded history choosing not to harm us. The ones that kill are the ones we put in the box. Scientists can now describe the pressure that builds in there almost exactly. What none of us can fully see, even now, even while we watch it happen, is the mind still bending underneath that fin.